Welcome to Fix and Fly, the business podcast, which identifies common business issues for you to watch out for in your day-to-day business life. So tune in every fortnight where we speak to leaders of corporates to SMEs where you can implement their strategies into your business. I'm your host, Larissa Logan from Fixity, where we help turn businesses around. Hi Buzz, welcome to the Fix and Fly podcast.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Do you mind giving our listeners a little overview of your journey to becoming a pain specialist?
Oh, God help us. Look, the CV reads like this guy hasn't got a clue what he wants to do when he grows up. So I spent the first 10 years of my postgraduate life being an internal physician. They're the sort of the boring people who do heart attacks, lungs, strokes, coronary care, intensive care. If you go to a hospital and you don't have an operation, chances are you'll have a physician looking after you, and that was me. Don't want to offend any physician, but it got a bit boring. So I leapt off to middle of nowhere, did some rural remote medicine, South Island, Chatham Islands, Aboriginal communities, Australia. Really exciting, really good fun. No high school for the kids. Came back and set up an urban general practice probably about 13 years ago, and was invited by Nelson to be their pain doctor. Their pain doctor had left. They wrongly assumed that, given my background of being a physician, they thought I'd understand pain. I didn't, but I didn't realise I didn't. That's a lovely plane to live in. When you don't know what you don't know, you're an expert. And during that 15 years, I've learned more and more about pain, and actually, to be honest, it's awesome, and I can expand more about why. But for the last 5 years, I've come back to Auckland, and I've been functioning as a pain specialist full-time for the last couple of years. And that's my career.
Amazing. So the medical sector is undergoing a significant amount of challenges and transformation. What would be the top 3 challenges that you're seeing in the sector at the moment?
I can wrap them all up into one sentence, really, and that is that the market forces are flawed. When health is being run as a business, then there's something really completely philosophically wrong with it before you even start. We should be into health promotion and disease prevention, but if we're doing that, business-wise, that's the most stupid model you could possibly grab hold of. So certainly in the primary sector and indeed in the public secondary sector, we are struggling with the fact that we are not preventing disease as well as we should. Having a business model for public health delivered services is just completely philosophically wrong. Now then, in the private sector, that's fine, and there's a lot of people want first world problems, and that's great. Let them have it. That's lovely. People want their teeth whitening. They want their body straightened out. They want hair transplants. So go for it. That's fantastic. But that's a wild difference to somebody having a heart attack or bursting a blood vessel, having a stroke or having cancer. It's in our best interest by a country mile to prevent preventable diseases, but business-wise, it's the worst thing we could possibly do.
What does the funding model look like for these businesses?
Okay, well, the funding model at the moment looks like it is underfunded. We've got a mixed model where the government is hands-off enough to have no responsibility, but hands-off on enough to tell people what to do, and that's just really, really frustrating. So what we need to do is have a whiteboard, nothing on it, have the stakeholders in the room and say, if we're starting from scratch, what would it look like? And the eventual, what it would look like, compare it to what we've got now, they'd be so different. It's hard to believe we're talking the same language. But that's what we need to do. We need to say, look, we've been wrong since the late 1930s. We've progressively thrown good money after bad and just gone worse and worse. So we're in trouble at the moment, but it's really technically been in trouble probably for the last 50 years. The trouble now is coming to a head. The vortex is increased in speed, but it's a very, very predictable decline. And it's, as I said before, the reason for that is that we're working on the principle that we should be preventing disease, but if we prevent it, we don't get paid for it. So instead we promote disease, we create it where it isn't there, we do procedures which aren't necessary, and the only way we can stay viable is by doing unnecessary medicine. So if we over-service and under-deliver, if we're getting paid for that, that's fantastic. If we're not getting paid for it, we're running at a loss. So certainly the primary sector especially is falling apart because of that very, very flawed funding model. If the primary sector falls apart, then it has to rely on the secondary sector, which cannot deliver either, as a result of which we're seeing diseases now presenting later and later, and the later a disease presents, the more expensive it gets, and rinse and repeat. What is frustrating is that the UK did this a few years ago really did it badly. And so we're looking at the UK and saying, how have you completely screwed it up? Because we want to do the same, but do it more efficiently. We want to screw it up even better here than you did there. And we're doing great. We're doing a good job at that.
What tips can you give to business owners now? Because that is the nice to have strategy for the future, right? And that's not going to happen anytime soon. What top tips can you give to business owners now to help their business become more viable?
The biggest expense for any business, and this is across the board, is the staffing. And so I hate to say this, but the best thing is cut down on the staff. Unfortunately, the price to pay for that will be under-servicing, but at the very, very least, then we become vaguely viable. I think the next thing is we need to unite. We are extremely underfunded. Plumbers, electricians, dentists, tow truck operators get paid a minimum of 2, 3, 10 times what doctors are getting paid. That has got less and less as time has gone by, as a result of which we are now losing doctors. When you lose doctors, you service even less, and we are getting worse and worse, more relying on the secondary sector. So to be viable, A, we need to look at our staffing structure, but B, I think we need to unite. If we unite, then we need to then lobby the government as a united group and say this funding model is flawed, it's not working, and we're losing ground, we're losing doctors, and the secondary sector is no longer coping. Your question was very valid. What can we do for individual owners? But if we take a step back, what can we look at health? The reality of it is, and this research has been done to death, if you invest $1 in primary care, you save spending $10 in the secondary sector. There was one study done in Australia which was really quite compelling. They looked at an individual who went to the GP with a certain problem which was sorted out by the GP. Cost to the Australian government about $67. If that same person went to the emergency department, had the same care, had it sorted out the same way, cost to the Australian government $670.
Wow.
A beautiful 1 in 10 ratio. And that shows how much we're struggling in primary care to deliver a service already. But nevertheless, it also shows how expensive relying on the secondary sector is. So very, very powerful bit of data there. But that is data and that's not opinion. So to answer your question twofold, one, we need to run our business like any other business. If we lobby the government properly, then we get funding the way we should be funding. And we should be funded to prevent disease, not promote it.
I hear about reducing costs, reducing expenses to make the business more viable. What I didn't hear from you is putting the price up to actually cover the cost to be able to deliver the service. What's your view on raising GP prices?
Yeah, look, I'm afraid we have to. We have to look at dentists, lawyers, electricians, plumbers, tow truck operators, mechanics. They don't have any trouble whatsoever charging what they're worth. Their hourly rate is whatever it is. Their labour costs, their expenses, add a bit more. That's what it costs. If it costs you $10,000 to get your car fixed, that's what it costs. Annoyingly, we're giving $10,000 service for a $45 fee at the moment, and that is completely not viable. So you're right. It was in the back of my head, and part of that unite includes either we put the cost up to the patient or we put the cost up to the government. Personally, I think we should put the cost up for the government. If the government was to fund a good primary service, we then could roll our sleeves up and deliver excellent primary care, which would include a huge, colossal contribution towards prevention.
It almost sounds like, from what you're saying, that the value for a GP has gone down over time on how the government has, because they're paying less for the same service.
And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. 20, 30, 50 years ago, GPs did an awful lot more and were valued professionally as well as valued in a monetary way. We've got less and less GPs being asked to do more and more, as a result of which GPs would love to do stuff, but they can't. They have to refer it on. So I hate to say this, but the less a GP does, the less like a doctor they become. And therefore, that value professionally goes down, as well as the monetary value professionally. And that's heartbreaking. There was a time when doctors did an awful lot of stuff. They would remove bits of skin, inject joints, do ultrasounds. Gynecologically, they weren't worried about any procedures. Sometimes there'd be light, general sedation. The anaesthetic skills of a GP 50 years ago was huge. Now nearly all of that is being referred to the secondary sector, 10 times the cost, and also devaluing the doctor who's no longer doing stuff which doctors used to do. But not only that, but as you rightly said, patients look at doctors and just say you're just a GP. And my daughter is now been qualified a few years in her cohort, looking at specialising. And that expression, are you going to be a specialist or just a GP, is what they're saying. It's very offensive to GPs because a good GP is worth a weight in gold. But nevertheless, that's the parlance.
And then how about the pipeline? How is that going to be impacting the medical sector over the next 10 years with so many medical practitioners retiring?
We need to turn that around. Otherwise, we're going to end up with, we used to have general practitioners, we used to have primary care. So unless we intervene, the trajectory is bad. Again, another bit of statistic, but just over 10 years ago, 40% of the country's doctors were working in general practice. 2 years ago, that repeat survey, only 25% of the country's doctors now working in general practice.
So where has that balance gone? Have they gone into the secondary health sector, or have they retired, or have they exited?
Well, both. But if we look at the number of doctors in the country, then you're very right. They are working not as general practitioners with good reason. It's just not worth its while income-wise. You can earn so much more, 5-10 times more in the private sector doing secondary level work. So why the hell use your degree to earn 10% of what you could be earning? And
how long are you studying for to become a doctor?
There's sort of the official answer, and then there's the real unofficial longer answer. The official answer is it's a 5-year degree, and then there is X number of years in hospitals. So if you're going to be a specialist, a minimum of 5 years in hospitals, usually up to 10, and then congratulations, you're a secondary sector specialist doing whatever you're doing. For general practice, 5 years at medical school, and then probably 5 years before you're a fellow of the college. Most people are studying much, much harder than all their cohort for quite a few years before they get into med school. So the sacrifices a sixth former is making so they can get into med school needs to be factored in. So how long you're studying for, the answer is longer than on paper what it looks like.
So you deserve to be paid a fair wage for all of that time, right?
In the same way, so does a lawyer, an accountant, a dentist, and to be honest, somebody who's actually stuck their neck out and got a tow truck running business going. We all deserve to get paid for what we're doing, and we're not getting paid for what we're doing at the moment.
And what's happening with the new cohort coming through? Are they staying in New Zealand?
Good question. No. That's a very good leading question as well. We are almost an offshore either immigration agency for going overseas or breeding ground for overseas doctors. Australia is paying, well, certainly in general practice, a minimum of 2 or 3 times what a GP here gets doing the same job.
Well, that's an easy question, and an easy answer, isn't it? Yeah.
Quite. So that's another place where GPs are going. It is actually heartbreaking because it's a really enjoyable job. I've done over 25 years of general practice, and as I said before, it's hard to do well, but if you ignore the fact that if you're working as a GP and doing a good job, you're doing a non-viable business and getting paid 10% of what you're worth, if you can push that to one side, it's such a good feeling. And I don't think there's any better feeling actually than the professional intimacy in people's lives where you literally can make a difference.
One of the key things in my mind before this podcast today was around the recent data breach of MyHealth. How much investment needs to go into a practice around securing patient data?
Oh, God, good question. Probably not enough. And annoyingly, your question needs to be expanded. How much investment needs to go into a practice, full stop? And the answer is several $100,000 before you even start going. The patient doesn't see that. All they see is, I've got a sore throat, you've got a prescription pad, the government's paying a shit ton of money for me to come and see you, so why do I have to pay you anything? That's all a patient sees. But you're absolutely right. We have not only the premises, the staff, the equipment, and the infrastructure, but then we've got the practice management software, and that software needs to be kept up to date, and the data security which goes along with that, of course, is all hidden costs which the patients don't see. To give a sort of yardstick, I set up a practice just over 13 years ago from scratch. A minimum of $300,000 went into setting it up before the first patient could walk in through the door. I don't think I ever got return on investment on that. That was just a nice, generous public service, and I think most GPs are doing that. And moreover, I think most GPs are overdoing that, which is why, again, the pendulum has swifted. That's a good word, shifted. Neologisms are good. No, the pendulum genuinely has shifted. Probably 20 plus years ago, more than 50% of doctors working in general practice had some sense of ownership of that practice. Now, more than 60% are working for somebody else. Why put several hundred thousand into a barely viable business which isn't paying you enough anyway? And so, again, we need to intervene with that. The really annoying thing is that when you don't have skin in the game, when you don't literally have ownership, either in reality or that sense of ownership, then after says the heart isn't in it either, and that's part of the reason I think we're now seeing an acceleration of that vortex of decline.
And are we also seeing a shift from GPs into kind of owning the practices to locums because it's low risk?
Precisely.
Yeah.
As I say, they're part of that 60+% who are no longer owning their own practice but are working for somebody else. And that is not true general practice. There was some data done many years ago which said that if a GP is resident looking after their own cohort of patients, it takes 5 years to get to know them, and thereafter then you sit in the groove. But sitting in that groove is not only professionally fulfilling, but the data then goes to show that GP who's been resident for more than 5 years, seeing the same patient, and the patient is seeing the same doctor, then that very same patient has on average a 4-year extension of their life expectancy and has a 30% reduction in their referral to the secondary sector. That's enormous. That's statistically highly significant data emerging from the benefits of having continuity of care, based, dare I say it, with the doctor who gives a shit.
So in your experience as a pain doctor, what advice could you give to SME business owners around managing stress when they're going through a really challenging time?
Don't be alone. I think that's probably the most important thing. And we do see certainly doctors who are in their businesses who don't have a close network of peers. We see them going off into orbit, and that's really heartbreaking. So I think really have a network of friends who you can trust. Everybody screws up. To be able to look at someone and say, I screwed up, can I have a beer? That's really, really important. Heartbreaking when we screw up, but we definitely screw up. For some weird reason, there seems to be a culture in medicine. You don't admit to your mistakes and you don't admit to not knowing what to do. Having a safe, small group of peers around you who you can say both to is absolutely, completely crucial. I think the next thing is doctors aren't business owners. We're not. We are trained to give a shit. We're trained to care. We're trained to go the extra mile. We spend too long with people. In fact, nearly everything we're trained to do goes at right angles to every possible business model. So we need business advice. We genuinely do. The really successful medical businesses have a manager who nevertheless works for them as opposed to the doctor working for the manager, but that manager is business savvy. That manager watches what's coming in, watches what goes out. They work together in concert. The only reason why my medical centre is still viable is because I've got an awesome manager. Without that manager, I would have gone into liquidation and if not bankruptcy.
And I think that's some great business advice, and that's the type of advice I give to my clients, is you don't have to be an expert in every area of your business, but make sure you get the right support around you. A big challenge that I've seen with the medical sector, with clients that I've worked on over the years, is they hate chasing debts. What advice would you give to business owners in the sector to chase these debts? Because you fundamentally have like a social values proposition, and you don't want to chase someone who's sick.
No. Goes back to what I said before. If you've got a good manager working for you, that happens in your background. You don't even know about it. It's great. Hello, patient. Nice to see you. Let me help you. Patient says, I'm really embarrassed, doctor. I've got a $500 debt. Oh, don't worry about that. The manager sorts that out. How can I help you? It's lovely. Outsource it, and you can outsource stress, which goes with that. And I think that's something we don't do very well, is outsourcing stress, and we should get better at it.
Well, thank you so much. Now, before we wrap this podcast up, what I'd like to do is just ask you a couple of questions. What is the best piece of business advice you have ever been given?
Long time ago, a good friend of mine just completed his MBA. I had a business on the West Coast, and I said, gosh, you've got an MBA, you must be very clever, must understand business. I don't understand business at all. And one thing we need to do, we need to have a mission statement. What should our mission statement be? And I was expecting some wonderful philosophical blending of threads, including Hippocrates and all sorts of fantastic medical ideas. And instead he said, you should only got one mission statement, and that is, you've got to make a profit. And then there was a long pause. And I realized he was completely correct. Because if I'm not viable, I can't offer a service. And if I can't offer a service, then I'm not got off the ground. So daft as it sounds, if you're not making a profit, if you're not viable, you're not doing what you want to do. And so it's really basic.
That's some great advice. The next question and the last question is, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Oh, God, where do you start? Don't take up smoking, don't drink less, that hot chick behind the bar, walk away. The exam you thought you were going to nail by not studying for it because you thought you got it, you actually should have pulled your finger out and done some study instead. Exercise more, eat less crap food. None of that has got to do with medicine or business, does it really? I think if I appeared in front of my 20-year-old self and started opening my mouth and giving advice, I would like a third party to intervene and say, don't listen to that old fart. I think we learn by making our own mistakes. We learn by screwing up. And I think if my older self said, don't screw up the way I did, I wouldn't have learned. I'm proud of the knocks I've taken. I'm proud of the mistakes I've made. I've learned from them, grown from them. And that's what we do. I think if my current self was to go and see my 20-year-old self, I'd turn around and walk away and frustratingly just watch my 20-year-old self screw out the way I've screwed up. And I've loved every second of it.
Thank you so much for those valuable insights. I think that SME business owners will be able to resonate with your thoughts because they will be feeling that as well, right? And that's how business owners learn from making mistakes. But the number one thing that I've heard from you today that I think that these SME business owners should implement into their businesses, getting the right advice around you, the viability piece, how do you manage that? You have a cash flow, you have a practice manager, you have that support to help you be successful in your business. So thank you so much for joining us on the Fix and Fly podcast, and wish you all the best in the future.
That was fun. Thanks a million.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you enjoy the Fix and Fly podcast, make sure you like, comment and subscribe, and share with anyone you think will find this useful. We look forward to seeing you next time.